If low carb diets work so well, why do so many people regain the body fat? It's not because people lack discipline, but because the diet itself is flawed. You lose 5 or 10 pounds in the first week, then the scale flatlines, your workouts feel worse, your energy crashes during the day, and then months later, you're heavier than when you started. So I'll show you precisely why low carb diets fail and what actually works for busy men trying to reach that 15% body fat or below. And here is the first illusion. This is what makes low carb diets look like they're working. When you cut carbs, your body burns through stored glycogen. So for every 1 gram of carbohydrate, your body also stores about 3 to 4 grams of water. Therefore, when you suddenly cut carbs, you're not just losing carbs, you're dumping a lot of water. Think of it like a sponge. If you soak a sponge in water, it becomes heavier. When you squeeze it out, it's lighter. Did the sponge lose any of its material or change? No, it just lost water. And this is how you can drop 5 to 10 pounds or 5 kilos in the first week, which isn't all body fat. But the moment you bring the carbs back into your diet, then it's like soaking the sponge again. And that's when weight usually comes right back on, which is why low carb diets look like they're working immediately. But the real reason low carb diets seem to work fast is actually because of this. Think about what disappears when carbs get removed. Bread, rice, pasta, cereals, snacks, and desserts. For most people, that's like 40 to 50% of the foods they normally eat, maybe even more. So when 40 to 50% of your diet disappears overnight, obviously calories drop dramatically. When your calories drop dramatically, your body starts using that stored body fat for energy. And that is what actually causes fat loss, not because carbs are inherently bad. Which means the real question isn't, should you remove carbs? But how do you control the carbs and your calories in a way that you can actually sustain? And to understand that, I need to show you something first. A large study published in the JAMA in 2018 called Diet Fit's Trial followed 609 overweight adults for an entire year. Half the group followed a low-carb diet, the other half followed a low-fat diet, which naturally included more carbohydrates. Both groups were instructed to eat whole foods and reduce their calories. So on average, both groups ended up eating a very similar amount of calories, and after 12 months, the researchers concluded there was no significant difference in weight loss between the low carb and the low fat diet. And this result has been repeated in multiple nutrition studies since. So if low carb was inherently superior for fat loss, there would be a clear difference, but there isn't, which reinforces the real driver of fat loss, being calories determine whether your body fat drops or it doesn't. But if you feel like you can't lose fat, regardless of low carb or low fat, let me show you a simple way to identify the difference between your maintenance calories and your fat loss. Instead of removing all carbs like keto or carnivore gurus will tell you, you can simply start by testing how many calories your body actually needs to maintain its weight. For example, let's say you maintain your weight at about 2,400 calories per day. If you reduce that slightly to 2,300 calories per day, there might be a slight dip on the scale, but probably not. So then you can try 2,200 calories for a week. And if there's still no change, then the week after you can try 2,100 calories. Eventually you reach a point where the scale starts to show a steady decline. The key difference here for you is that you don't need to remove the food you enjoy to do this. You can still eat bread, rice, potatoes, fruit, pasta, ice cream, or whatever you want, provided you structure the portions and the calories to stay in a deficit. Because for most men who eat out regularly with clients, colleagues, or family, then constantly dodging carbs is a pain in the ass. And there's another big problem that low carb diets run into. Say someone has 20 pounds of body fat to lose at a realistic pace. For most guys working full-time in a career or business with families, that's probably going to take 4 to 8 months, depending on how busy and consistent their lifestyle is. And if you ask yourself honestly, can you go 4 to 8 months with almost zero carbs? Most people can't. I definitely wouldn't. I eat carbs with every meal because they make my diet more satisfying and just easier to sustain long term. I never feel like I missed out or that I didn't eat enough. But if I take carbs away, I feel like I've only had an entree. And then I'm sniffing around for seconds or snacks later on. And a lot of guys say these similar things when they try a low or no carb diet. Often guys will say something like,
"My wife does most of the cooking,"
or
"I don't have time
to make separate meals every day.
And that's the reality for most men over 30, with family dinners, work drinks, client lunches, travel, birthdays, date nights, etc. So in these situations, jumping into a low-carb diet, like keto, carnivore, or any diet that demonizes carbs, is jumping straight into the hardest diets to follow. And a big hurdle is usually that nobody else wants to do it with you. And if you keep saying,
"No, I can't eat that. I'm doing this special diet,"
people will tempt you even harder. Sooner or later, most people crack under that pressure. But when they finally eat the carbs again, the scale suddenly spikes from the glycogen and the water returning. Then they beat themselves up over this when they never needed to cut the carbs so aggressively in the first place. Which is why, if your goal is to lose fat and stay lean, starting with one of the hardest diets to follow in real life is the fastest way to fail. Yet, people still make this next mistake by trying to condense a low carb or no carb diet into like this short-term attack. It usually ends up looking something like this. Monday to Thursday, very strict, no carbs or some kind of keto approach. And because keto can take several days just to kick in, people might also do fasting on top of this and try to drop their calories down to 1,200 to 1,400 per day. But then Friday arrives and there's a dinner out, a few drinks, pizza, dessert, whatever. And now Friday to Sunday jumps to 3,000 calories. So then the weekly average total calories can actually end up around your maintenance level. And then the problem is it can take another 3 to 5 days for the scale to settle back down again, right about the time the next weekend rolls around. So it feels like you're dieting extremely hard, but then you're stuck in a cycle that is neutralizing your consistent fat loss. And this exposes another problem for guys doing their training during the week. Your body naturally prefers to use glycogen as a primary fuel source for training. So when carbohydrates are extremely low, glycogen levels drop faster. Then your workouts start to feel flat, you fatigue faster, you feel weaker, and progress can start to reverse. And you even risk losing muscle while dieting. However, carbohydrates help prevent this performance drop. For example, a study published in the Journal of Physiology followed elite race walkers during a training block while comparing different diets. The researchers concluded that the ketogenic low carbohydrate, high fat diet impaired exercise economy and negated the performance benefit of training. Meanwhile, athletes consuming the higher carb diets improved their race outcomes. When carbs are included in the diet, most people experience more consistent PRs in their workouts, better muscle pumps, and an easier time maintaining or building muscle while losing fat. And that is essentially a recomp approach. And these benefits help keep metabolism higher. So while carbs often get blamed for the fat gain, they're actually one of the most important fuels for your training performance and muscle retention. Also, the more muscle you maintain in a dieting phase, the less your metabolism will decline. But if training performance drops, muscle starts disappearing, then your maintenance calorie level also drops with it. So if you eventually go back to eating the way you used to, the calories that used to maintain your weight now push you into a surplus faster, which is why another reason balanced diets support training performance and your muscle retention and produce more sustainable fat loss phases. And there's something else the keto and carnivore warriors won't show you. A study called the Satiety Index, published in the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition, compared how filling different foods actually are. The researchers tested 38 common foods and how satisfied people felt after eating them. The control food was white bread, which they gave a satiety score set at 100, and all the other foods were compared to that 100 for white bread. Boiled potatoes scored the highest at 323. Other high-scoring foods were oranges, oats, and apples. And these high-scoring foods contain carbohydrates, fiber, and water, which tend to make meals more filling. When your meals are more satisfying, you'll find it easier to eat fewer calories later in the day, especially after dinner or before bed, when your appetite usually creeps up. But even with all this evidence, people will still blame this next thing for being stuck above 20% body fat. Whenever this topic comes up, someone usually says,
"Yeah, but the problem is the insulin resistance."
The claim is that if someone has insulin resistance or a higher level of it, they must remove carbohydrates. But in the study we looked at earlier that followed the 609 adults for an entire year, comparing the low carb and the low fat diets, the researchers also found that baseline insulin secretion was not associated with dietary effects on the weight loss in the study, meaning insulin resistance did not determine which diet worked better. And there's another key thing you need to know. This study, published in the Diabetes Care, found that weight loss significantly improved insulin sensitivity. And if the weight was not regained, the improvement in insulin sensitivity was maintained for 2 to 3 years, which makes sense because your insulin resistance is often a result of having excess body fat. It is not the thing preventing fat loss from happening. So this doesn't mean eating sugar all day is a good idea. It means you don't have to avoid carbs to lose fat. Also, alcohol is technically metabolized similarly to carbohydrates. So unless you quit drinking for life, eliminating carbs completely isn't realistic long term. And many guys stay stuck above 20% body fat because they're in that vicious cycle. So when you take a step back and look at all this evidence, sure, low carb diets can help people lose weight quickly, but the research consistently shows they're not required for long-term fat loss. People lose fat by creating a consistent calorie deficit and then following a program they can actually maintain with a busy lifestyle. For most professional men and business owners, that usually means including flexibility with their carbohydrates and not eliminating them completely. Because the real challenge isn't finding a diet that works for just 3 weeks. It's finding one that you can stick to for 3 years and beyond that, which is why we factor in carbohydrates into my clients' nutrition strategy to support their training performance, sustainability, and make fat loss more enjoyable. And if you're looking to implement a fat loss phase that is data-driven and highly accountable, that is exactly what we focus on inside my metabolic recomp coaching. To learn more, tap the link below this video in the description. If you want to understand how fat loss actually unfolds over time, watch this video next to see the 4 stages of fat loss that nobody explained.